Hello, thank you for watching. Thought I'd start wishing you all a happy Valentine's Day here today. In addition to that, I believe we are 15 days away from the start of meteorological spring, at least as we define it as weather folks. Of course, the official or calendar spring will start a little bit later, not a few weeks after. But meteorological spring starts March 1st, Valentine's Day today. We have to wait 15 days this year because it's a leap year, of course. So some other fun things to keep track of here as we enter into the spring months. As we wrap up winter here, I think about where we started kind of at the end, or where we finished, I should say, at the end of last year, talking about El Nino. I remember thinking at the time, if our forecasts and our thinking is correct for El Nino, we're going to be using the term atmospheric river a lot. We're going to be using the term Pacific jet extension quite often because that's what we typically see in these El Nino winters, or the water years at least. We have more of that to talk about today. Certainly have talked about that in videos here at the turn of the new year. And more of that today. We're looking down at the current jet stream level winds estimated across the Pacific Ocean. If you look closely, you can see here Hawaii in the middle of the screen. Over here on the right is the west coast of North America, and then the fast level winds, 5 miles above our heads, moving very quickly. In fact, where I selected this just north of Hawaii, talking about 212 mile an hour wind speeds. So you get a very fast flight if you're interested in flying from Asia over to the west coast of the U.S. You just ride these jet stream level winds all the way and decrease your flight time. Now, for the importances of weather, this one's going to look similar to these other Pacific jet extensions we have. Each one kind of a little bit different. I think this one maybe not as potent as some of the ones that we have seen, but nonetheless certainly worth mentioning in the forecast. I'm kind of spoiling it as to what we're going to be talking about. More atmospheric river events, more rainfall for California. I don't think the wind threat's going to be quite as potent as we saw in some of the past events. But nonetheless, we'll break it all down. We'll get through it. Before I do that, I want to mention, if you look closely over here, kind of toward Oregon and Northern California, it doesn't look like much, but there is this dip or trough in the jet stream, and that's actually bringing a lot of the inclement weather that we're seeing here today on Wednesday afternoon. So showers, rain in the Bay Area, heavier rain further to the north of that, and then in parts of western Oregon as well, really owing to the little trough here moving through on Wednesday afternoon. I want to start here. This is a similar map that we looked at just on the page before, looking at the eastern Pacific Ocean, and we're looking at the forecast from the ECMWF, that's the European weather model, of those jet stream level winds going forward into time. So this is valid here as Wednesday evening. If you look just north of Hawaii, there's those fast winds that we were just looking at, the 200 mile an hour plus. If I take this forward into Thursday and then into Friday after that, you can see those winds, the jet stream inching eastward until finally kind of focusing right on California as we go through the weekend into Saturday, Sunday, and now Monday, inching more through Southern California and then parts of Arizona before finally exiting the region, perhaps even as late as Tuesday into Wednesday. Now, one thing we have to talk about with these Pacific jet extension events is very often atmospheric rivers. If you look closely, the most immediate one toward California and Oregon is a bit of a weaker event here, but nonetheless brings some of the heavy rain to parts of Northern California, heavier snow in parts of the northern and parts of the Central Sierras, the Klamath Mountains, with winter storm warnings out. The kind of bigger system that we're watching, you can almost tell it's got a little bit more vigor to it, is just to the west, again, right north of Hawaii, helping to be powered in part by that jet stream that we just looked at. Strong low pressure system associated with this as well. And this is really going to be making its way over toward the west coast this weekend here. Another way we can visualize this atmospheric moisture, that's the satellite product that we're looking down on now. If we go over to the forecast of precipitable water, it's a measure of moisture in the atmosphere. In this particular plot that you're looking at, the colors actually represent a departure from normal for this time of year. And you can see that elevated moisture, that departure from normal associated with that second event moving toward the coast of California. If I take this forecast into Thursday morning and then into late Thursday, you can see it getting closer and closer to the west coast of the United States until ultimately kind of right at the doorstep here, getting into Friday night late, and then ultimately very early on Saturday, bring that moisture up into Northern California, parts of Oregon, and then eventually Central and Southern California as we go through the weekend. Potentially kind of a two, if you don't count this immediate rainfall that we're getting here today, kind of a two-part event going through the weekend. If we look down just at the visible satellite loop here, just north of Hawaii, you can see that very strong low pressure system, the cold front, the fast moving jet stream level winds, somewhat apparent even just looking at this imagery here. But this is this feature, the low pressure system, the atmospheric river, and the moisture associated with it, or what's going to be inching closer and closer toward the west coast as we go through the end of the week here. Now, if you look way up at the top right of the screen, you can see Oregon, Northern California. There's our current system. Right? Bringing some gusty winds, lots of clouds, rainfall, and snowfall to parts of the northwest here. So let's zoom in and take a look at that. See the big cloud field over Oregon, even parts of Washington with the cirrus clouds there. Northern California seeing a lot of heavy rainfall, and that's now pushing in even to parts of central California. Take a look at the mosaic precipitation here. See some showers moving through the Bay Area, getting into the Central Valley near Sacramento. Stronger or heavier rain further to the north through the Klamath area, and then even some rainfall now getting up into parts of the Willamette Valley and the Portland area. Look a little bit different of a product here. This is looking at the snowfall forecast. One area that we've been tracking for snowfall deficits has been the Cascades, certainly the northern Cascades, which don't look to get too much here in this immediate forecast I'm showing you. But the Sierras getting some snowfall out of this, and even the central Sierras and northern Sierras as well. This forecast I'm showing you here is really just out over the next 30 hours or so. I'm trying to capture this immediate system that we're dealing with here today. And we do get some nice amounts here up into the parts of the Cascades, talking about a foot plus, and parts of the central and northern Sierras, probably a bit more than that, and some of the higher elevations with some intermountain snow as well over by Idaho, some areas in northeast Oregon, and parts of Wyoming as well. If we look at the snow water equivalent year-to-date averages for each basin across the West region, we've looked at this map a number of times now this year, keeping track of where we're above average or where we're below average on the water year for these different areas, and then ultimately right the reservoirs and the irrigation downstream from it as we go into the summer months here. Sierra Nevadas, we were at a much poorer situation, if you will, going into parts of January, certainly the middle of it. We've improved the situation there. We were about 40% of the water year-to-date average. We bumped that up now to about 70 to 80%, and we're even a little bit higher than that going up the Cascades until you get to parts of the northern Cascades and the northern Intermountain West. The kind of central Intermountain West, or even the lower Colorado or middle Colorado basin, doing very well, above average, some areas well above average here in parts of Arizona, at least near average here in parts of kind of the eastern Colorado basin here. So you get kind of the east of the crest of the Sierras and south of maybe the Salmon River Mountains. Most folks doing pretty well here in terms of the Colorado River. It's the areas here along the Sierras, the Cascades, and the far northern Intermountain West I'm keeping more of a close eye on. As we go into the forecast, keep that in mind when we look at some of these rainfall and snowfall totals as well. I want to start here, get the simulated precipitation forecast here from the ECMWF. Give an idea of timing on this event, because there's really three that we have to keep track of here. The one today, and then I think two separate events this weekend associated with that Pacific Jet Extension and the Atmospheric River event. If I make this forecast valid from the European model here on Wednesday afternoon, you can see the rainfall that we just looked at in the radar image a few slides ago, with some of that precipitation moving into the Bay Area, heavier rain in the northern coastal mountains, and some snow getting up into the northern Sierras and the Klamath Mountains, and now the Willamette Valley getting some of this rainfall as well, likely to continue into the evening hours as well here tonight on Wednesday, including perhaps getting heavier at times for parts of the Central Valley, particularly the Sacramento Valley and some of the coastal areas here in California. So you go into tomorrow, some of that rain shifting further south on Thursday through parts of the Central Valley, even trying to get into the San Joaquin Valley, perhaps the central coast of California. Another wet day tomorrow into Thursday morning for parts of the Willamette Valley. We're seeing the Cascades get more of that snow that we just looked at on the forecast before, even parts of Idaho and then western Wyoming as well, as far as that snowfall. If I take the forecast through Thursday evening, now into Friday morning, finally waning a bit for the Willamette Valley, perhaps not as wet as we get into the lunch hour on Friday. And we get a little bit of a break here for California as well, but here comes that next system, right, coming in Friday evening. I talked about that atmospheric river really arriving in earnest late Friday into early Saturday. We can see that here on the precipitation. If I take this back just here, this is really Saturday, very early Saturday morning. Heavy rain now getting into parts of northern coastal California, some light rain or moderate precipitation getting into the Willamette Valley of Oregon. As we go through the day, Saturday gets heavier and heavier into the evening hours, when I think we'll see some of the stronger rain from, I guess, what we'll call the second event here of the three that are worth mentioning. And then looking up at the higher elevations, heavy snow likely in parts of the Sierra Nevadas with this event coming through. We get something of a break, perhaps going into Sunday morning and then through Sunday evening, but not much. It's really, we really bring the precipitation back into California, perhaps some Nothing too damaging in terms of gusty winds right now in the forecast. That doesn't seem to be the kind of big concern with these events here this weekend, but nonetheless, likely some winds to shake things up as we go into parts of the weekend. Really Sunday evening, things pick up in a big way for California in terms of precipitation, getting even into parts of Oregon at time. Heavy snow in this year is likely peaking at some point early Monday or even into midday Monday, kind of and that extends maybe to this whole 3-tiered event that we might get some of the strongest snow or even the strongest rainfall for California with this third event really kind of way late Sunday into early Monday, and then through the day on Monday waning in terms of intensity. But even like some of these previous events that we've seen, you get these low pressure systems stalled off the coast like the forecast suggests now from the eastern WF, where you keep the showers, you keep the kind of raw weather, temperatures are cooling off on the backside of the system, and you get lingering snow showers in the Sierra Nevadas, and that can boost snow totals, at the end of the event even higher than maybe they were. So keep in mind that Monday events can be waning in intensity, but really Tuesday and then this forecast now into Wednesday the 21st, right, a 7-day forecast at this point, we still technically see some lingering showers poking around parts of the west region from the systems moving through this weekend. Now, just a few slides ago, I showed you the NBM snowfall totals. That's the National Blend of Models, takes into account a few of the different weather models here. That was just for the kind of the next 30 hours. I want to give you a focus on what was going to happen here. This is kind of the total, the 7-day forecast out to next Wednesday morning. You can see the very high totals. We're talking 2 feet plus in parts of the central, southern, and even northern Sierra Nevadas here across California. So nice big boost to their snowfall totals. And unlike maybe the last event, the Cascades getting materially beneficial snowfall from this as well. We're talking, well over a foot in some of these locations, maybe 2 or more in parts of the southern Cascades, which even some snow like in this forecast trying to get into the northern Cascades as well. And then the northern Mountain West getting some snow as well here to help the situation up there. So I don't think, at least looking at this forecast here, this isn't a bad thing in terms of where those snowpack deficits were, at least regionally, that we just discussed. With some heavier snowfall focused more to the north, perhaps, than Arizona, where it's been higher than average, at least this water year so far. Precipitation-wise, I'll take this kind of through those each stages of the event. So I'll take this into Friday morning. Let's take it out to Friday at lunch, at least make this a 48-hour forecast in terms of precipitation. This forecast from the Weather Prediction Center via the National Weather Service, you can see trying to push up closer to an inch in the Willamette Valley just over the next 48 hours. Higher amounts probably in the terms of snowfall, getting up into the Cascades, heavy amounts in the northern coastal California area. Nothing too significant in terms of precipitation other than getting the ground wet here in parts of the Central Valley, but we have seen some stronger showers at time get into the Bay Area, likely increasing totals a little bit locally where those showers impact. With that second atmospheric river event coming through on Saturday and then into Sunday morning, snow totals boosted in the higher elevations, but rainfall boosted as well, getting up probably closer to an inch more in the Willamette Valley. So we're talking 1.5 inches now in totals by Sunday, getting higher totals in the Sacramento Valley as well. We're now looking at maybe over an inch, maybe getting toward 1.5 inches for parts of the Sacramento Valley, higher values along the coastal California mountains here. San Joaquin Valley, not seeing a ton of high precipitation amounts here. And if you think about the last systems that have come through, the forecast didn't necessarily deliver there. We saw less rain getting into the San Joaquin Valley than was originally forecast as well. So keep that in the back of our minds as we go through this. That third event, likely the most potent. You can see that boost totals in a big way, now getting all the way out into late Tuesday. See heavy rain all the way through the central California now. We're talking 2 inches plus in parts of the Sacramento Valley. A little bit more skeptical on what we're going to be seeing at the end of this in the San Joaquin Valley, but right now this forecast from WPC looking at 1.5 inches or more for parts of Fresno and other San Joaquin municipalities, kind of northern or nearer to the foothills, with higher amounts certainly in some of the coastal areas, maybe even highlighting here parts of Santa Barbara and Oxnard that got all that rain that we talked about not just last week. I'll leave this here for now. This is the rainfall forecast as is. This was a total accrual, right? So a total accrual throughout the next 7 days. Wanted to give you an idea of the timing and the totals of those precipitation amounts. The kind of big picture before we kind of get nitpicky into are we going to be at 1.5 inches or 1 3/4 inches is we're getting a lot of rain from the system and a lot of snowfall as well. So kind of your quintessential El Nino atmospheric river system, maybe not quite as potent as some of the ones we've seen recently, certainly not in the wind department, but it's going to boost snow totals in the Sierra Nevadas, hopefully in parts of the Cascades that need it as well, and bringing some heavy rain to parts of the Willamette Valley in Oregon. When I go out into the extended forecast, it seems like the last few events that we talked about, as we shifted into the extended forecast, looking out maybe into the next week, we saw hints of another Pacific jet extension or another atmospheric river event, and we were like, okay, at this point next week we're gonna be doing this all over again. We'll be talking about the next event. That's how it felt at times in January and February here. Not quite seeing that same picture this time looking out into the extended forecast. One of the reasons for that, looking at the Madden-Julian oscillation forecast, that's kind of in the red, and then the yellow spaghetti plot showing the different ensemble members here from the ECMWF forecast. What we've kind of been talking about this winter is that when the MJO gets into these Pacific phases, particularly the western and then shifting into the eastern Pacific, or kind of going around this way, counterclockwise on this phase diagram, that tends to be a wetter signal for the West Coast. More Pacific jet extensions, more atmospheric river events, that tends to be the influence. And really since January 24th, all the way until very recently, we've kind of been stuck with the Madden-Julian oscillation in the Pacific, likely influencing this repeat cycle of event after event, or Pacific jet extension after Pacific jet extension, literally on the horizon to our west. Now, finally, if you look at the forecast, we're getting out of these Pacific phases, going back toward null space, maybe restarting the Madden-Julian oscillation in the other hemisphere near the Indian Ocean. That would tend to cool things down perhaps a bit, or at least not get nearly as many of these big precipitation events into the area if this forecast comes to fruition. And some good agreement here on a number of models that just might be the case. So keep that in the back of your mind before we get into the long-range forecast, that unlike maybe the previous videos, we're now talking about a back-to-back system week to week here. Before I shift too much into the long range, did want to talk about temperatures a little bit. Haven't been too focused on these as we've been in winter, because we haven't had a ton of freezes to talk about lately, at least in some damaging areas. But we do have some cold temperatures in northwest Montana to talk about. We're looking at the NDFDs, the National Weather Service forecast low temperatures for Friday morning, that is February 16th. Wind chill advisories out for a county or two here in northwest Montana. Those could expand here, with temperatures talking negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit, or even less than that for parts of Montana, which getting into February, that's getting pretty cold, even for folks near Canada. So keep an eye on that. Looks like it's just going to be a quick shot of cold air here more this weekend, Friday into Saturday, before we warm up, relatively speaking, into a balmy 20 degrees Fahrenheit, 10, 12 degrees below. Freezing getting into Tuesday, February 20th. If we look at big picture temperature swings long term, this is looking at a 5-day rolling window of temperature anomalies. And I wanted to show it like that, give you a sense of where we're going. I should say this is a 1-day rolling anomaly, excuse me. You can see those cold temperatures here going into this weekend, into Friday and then Saturday up in northwest Montana. We actually start to warm up an approach of these atmospheric river events, particularly kind of getting into this weekend before that more potent Monday one. But something we've seen with these past events is we tend to cool down on the backside of this, kind of reintroducing a bit of frost and freeze risk to the area. So always kind of interested if we're going to see that signal from the forecast. If I take this ECMWF, the European model forecast, out into Wednesday and Thursday, again, 7-day forecast all the way out to the 22nd now of next week, we do see a bit of a cold signal across parts of Nevada, Arizona, and California. It's not the strongest one, it's not the most potent, but it's there, and it's 7 to 8 days out. I think it's something we'll have to keep an eye on just because of the precedents that we've seen in the past after these events with getting some cold air into the area. So this is something to keep an eye on going forward, getting out into the end of next week, kind of starting around the middle of the work week next week. And I'll show you what I mean by I don't think we're going to see another one of these Pacific jet extensions. This is the one we were just talking about. Here's the forecast for the ECMWF jet stream, valid as of tomorrow. If I drag this out through the weekend and then into next week, we'll see the forecast that I just talked about with that focusing on parts of California. But if I take this out really kind of toward next weekend, that subtropical jet stream, the one that we typically watch for those big Pacific jet extensions, well to the south now. We're talking Hawaii over to parts of the Baja California Peninsula and to northern Mexico, really kind of a non-issue for parts of California, Nevada, or some of these other areas where we've been watching these Pacific jet extensions, the atmospheric river events focus. If anything, we have the more northern or polar branch of the jet stream focusing, maybe trying to focus on parts of the northwest, an area that has been a bit drier times in terms of those snowfall deficits. So that could be a change of pace as we get toward the end of February. This is from the long-range ECMWF ensemble forecast. Again, very long-range forecast. You always have to take these with a grain of salt, but it's there. If we look at the GFS ensemble forecast, very similar. Again, looking all the way out into the Sunday, February 25th, but a very similar forecast with that well south subtropical jet stream, and perhaps this polar branch trying to focus more on parts of Oregon or Washington if this were to get a little bit further toward the east here. If you look at a rolling 5-day window of precipitation anomalies, of course, as we start this, we're going to see all the precipitation we're going to get this weekend in parts of Oregon and California, maybe even getting into Southern California at times near the end of next week, or I should say maybe toward the middle of next week. But when we go beyond that, again, out toward next weekend, that shifts drier. That makes sense with what we just saw from the MJO. It makes sense what we just saw from that jet stream forecast I showed you from both the European model and the GFS, that we're likely getting out of this repetitive Pacific jet extension cycle that we've been in. If we look at 5-day temperature anomalies, so similar kind of window, looking at where we're going with temperatures. If I take this into next week, we see that cold temperature signal that we just talked about, where we might be seeing a reemergence of frost and freeze concern in parts of California, maybe even Arizona. Don't want to sound any alarms yet. We're getting into that kind of blossom season, but it's something to keep an eye on, given that it's there in the forecast models. And that might even stick around a while if some of the long-range forecasts are to be believed. So again, it could be more of a long-term concern, getting maybe even into March. Again, too early in the forecast to say anything of certain, just something to keep an eye on as we go toward the end of February here. If you look at the 8 to 14-day temperature outlook from the CPC, I'll make this one a little bit bigger here for your screen. You can see some of that cold temperature concern just slightly below average temperature likely here on the 8 to 14-day outlook. Again, this is looking out into the next work week, but otherwise pretty near normal across the western U.S. This from the Climate Prediction Center. If you look at the precipitation signal, I'd say that's maybe even a little bullish for parts of the Northwest. But again, we saw that polar branch focusing more on the Northwest. It makes sense that that bullseye would shift out of California, out of parts of Arizona, out of parts of Nevada, and more toward the Northwest. Again, where they have a snowfall deficit, and they could use some of that more snowpack going toward the end of the water year here. Just to get kind of another opinion here, this is looking at the ECMWF extended model. This is really a precipitation anomaly forecast similar to the ones that we just looked at. But it goes from February 23rd, so starting next week, all the way out to March 23rd. And just kind of looking at these to get a sense of where we might be going out into the month of March. And curiously, it has that pattern more extended, where more focus on the Northwest for some of these precipitation events, and we actually might be shifting drier for parts of California, Arizona. Again, very long-range forecast. Don't want to put too much weight into this, but at least until we get that MJO back around to some of those specific phases, which can take quite a while sometimes, maybe even into March, we're likely not seeing another big series of extended or repeat Pacific jet atmospheric river events, big snowfalls. Something to keep in mind as we go toward March as well. At least not right now, not seeing a signal for a miracle March, maybe in the beginning of the month. We'll have to see where we go and that MJO and some other signals as we get into the end of March or maybe even April. Speaking of which, if we look at the ECMWF seasonal forecast for March, April, May, I believe I showed this last week. There's something of a wet signal for parts of California, Oregon, Nevada, but not the strongest. Not something like we're seeing here in the southeast in terms of that El Nino connection to higher precipitation values in spring. So do see something of a slight wetter side of the forecast here getting into spring, looking over March, April, and May, but nothing too strong to speak of right now. And I did want to shift over quickly. I did show you that precipitation anomaly forecast for the western U.S. here between February 23rd and March 23rd. If we look at the temperature forecast over that same time period, again, highlighting that risk for some cold temperature concerns going out over the next 30 to 40 days, potentially. You can't draw too much from a long-range model like this. Of course, frost and freeze is sometimes can sneak up on you. The right conditions can happen overnight in the valley, and we drop temperatures very quickly. But just kind of given the background state of the forecast that we're looking at here, I think it's enough to warrant a heightened concern of it going forward over the next 30 days. I think that is all I have for you all here this evening. Thank you for watching.